Using a griddable to answer a question. On the STAAR test, they will have 2 or 3 griddable questions that you'll have to answer, and this is just a review of how to put those questions in the correct way. So here are a few tips. I think the biggest thing is just to start from the decimal point. So if you have, for instance, 40, keep in mind, where does that decimal point go? It's going to go right after the 0. And if you can think about that, then you'll have a much easier time putting it into the griddable. A common mistake that I always see is students that start from the far left or the far right. If you do that, especially on this type of griddable, you're probably going to get the answer wrong. And then lastly, just check and make sure as you go on to the next question that your answer is what you mean it to be. For instance, if you end up putting in 40 like this, and you notice, well, 0.4 isn't the same as 40, well, then you'd be right. You need to make sure you check that before you go on to the next question. So let's say we have 8 as the answer you want to put in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my decimal point. The decimal point for 8 would just be right behind it, right there. So I'm going to put in 8 right here, and then I'd bubble it in. Now I could keep this just like it is and it would be correct. I could also put in zeros behind it right here, because 8.00 is the same as 8. I could put in a positive sign if I want. I could even put zeros in front of it and it would still be correct, because that doesn't change the value of the answer. But you could just put 8 in by itself and it would technically be correct. Okay, so 500. Think again, where is my decimal point? It's going to be behind that loud 0. So I might even go backwards, 0, 0, 5, and then I would bubble them in. Notice I'm not starting from the far right or the far left. I'm starting from my decimal point and working my way around that. Once again, I could put a positive sign. I could put in zeros behind it. As long as they're after the decimal point, that won't change the value. I could put a 0 in front of it, and that would technically be right. But if I just had this part right here, it would be counted right. If I had the answer -5, well, I'm just going to think about, where does that decimal point go? It's going to go right behind the 5. It doesn't give me a decimal point, so that's where it goes. So I'm going to put in a 5, and then bubble that in all the way. And then I also want to make sure I put in my negative. That is the minimum amount that I could put in to get that answer right. I could put in more zeros behind or in front if I want, but I have to have that negative sign in order to get this right. So if my answer is 19.5, well, this time I actually do have a decimal in there, so I'm just going to work around the decimal. So I have my 5, and the 9 and the 1, and then I bubble it in. 19.5. And this is what I would need to put in order to get it correct. So, I read it again, make sure 19.5 is that the answer I want to go for. In this case, yes, 19.5 is the answer I want to go for. I could put the positive sign in, I could put zeros in front or behind, but this is the way to answer it correctly. Okay, this has been a review of using a griddable to answer a question, the middle school edition. Just make sure you follow those tips. Make sure you keep in mind where the decimal point does go in that answer, and work your way around from there.